Hi YouTube, XtremeTrainz here. So in this video, pretty simple. We're going to be taking a look at something which I didn't expect to pick up, but there was a bit of a lull in Thomas items. This was before I bought the minis. It's just been sitting in my review pile. And I kind of saw this and I was like, it's going to make a really interesting comparison to do, given that it's quite a new character. And I saw it on sale at my local Woolworths, which does sell some Thomas merchandise, but apparently not Thomas minis anymore. But you don't care about any of that. You care about the review. So in this video, we're taking a look at the Thomas TrackMaster Push-Along Nia. Let's see what she's got in store for us. Alright, so Nia, TrackMaster Nia has the same packaging as the other engines. As you can see, the engines you have on the back are Nia, Percy, and Bertie. I haven't actually seen the Bertie in real life, but I have seen the Percy. Yep, and you can see push-along and motorized engines work on TrackMaster track. Woo! Okay, cool. So what are we waiting for? Let's crack her open. Okay, so we'll do a full 360, but the first thing I want to say is she feels really substantial, really heavy. Like compared to Thomas, Nia feels like she's got some weight about her. So let's have a look at her face. I think this is a fine Nia face. Yep, I've got no issues with that at all. Coming around to the side, the detailing does seem a little bit plain, just because, you know, her stripe only takes up that kind of thin little part, whereas obviously normally because she's longer and thinner, you know, it kind of proportionally makes more sense, but this makes it look quite thin and a bit empty on these top and bottom parts. But that is just because Nia has been squished up to be a tiny little tank engine when she's actually quite long. But you can see you've got most of the Nia details that are there. You've got these bits on the side. You do have her little steam valve here. You've got these tanks, which are interestingly a separate piece. So they're not painted on. There's like plastic pieces that come up through the metal chassis. You can see you got the little bit of paint on there. We've got the cab details. We've got a tiny little coal bunker smushed up here at the back. No bubbles on the front, on the back or the front, as you can see. We've got Nia's name on the bottom here, copyright 2018. And you can see that unlike Thomas, I don't think Nia suffers from like looking really wide as much. So I don't think she looks as weird as Thomas does, which is why I kind of picked her up. I thought it was interesting, especially because this is really not what Nia looks like. She doesn't have a really tall cab. And again, ironic given that, you know, the Thomas Take Along version 2, which had the squashed cabs, which is designed that kids continued along, you know, is the opposite problem for Nia. Like her cab is way too tall. It looks weird that it's so tall, but she's actually been just squashed this way and like squashed quite in. But I actually don't think, I think she looks a little bit not quite like Nia. And what I mean by that is I'd kind of not watched the show for a while when I bought her, but as soon as I watched the most recent series 24, I was like, oh, hang on a minute. Nia doesn't look like this. But I think, it's just weird. It's one of those things where I think by itself, it's actually a decent looking toy train. But I think what makes it weird is it doesn't look really anything like the source material. So that's just kind of my thoughts on Nia, and I think that's what's really interesting to do here now is compare her to Thomas, and she's just so much heavier than Thomas. Like, so she feels like twice as heavy as Thomas. But see how Thomas kind of looks like, you know, it's because he's quite narrow and then he gets fat at the bottom, whereas Nia's a bit more consistent in how far her tanks come out. So then the wheels don't look like they are too wide, but you can see that again, I believe they actually use the same chassis, which is correct. Yep, they use the same chassis. But for some reason, like, Thomas's wheels look really too big, same as on the side. But for Nia, the way they've designed her, she actually doesn't look like, she looks more in scale to her wheels than Thomas does, which I think means she looks a bit less weird by herself. But then when you put her next to Thomas, she's obviously too small. So it's a really weird kind of engine, and I'm really glad I picked it up because it is such a strange engine. So what I'm going to do here is to kind of make this make a bit more sense. I'm gonna grab some other Nias I've got, and we're gonna do a bit of a comparison. So you can see a couple of Nias in front of me. I think, and this is where it's really quite interesting to do that comparison, right? Because you can see that if we compare it to the Mini has that same problem. Obviously, this is the 75th version, so it's got some weird printing. But if you look at the side that's the same, you can see the Mini has got the same kind of weird problem with this looking a bit empty because, you know, of the proportions. But I think the cab being so high really throws you off, especially when you compare the back and you can see the kind of the more correct ratio of height coal bunker, whereas this Nia is really tall and it looks kind of weird. So I think that's kind of weird. And then you compare it again to the premium, in inverted commas, Thomas Wood engine, which ironically is so much lighter than this one. And you can see that it's kind of, again, like this one is quite basic in that it doesn't have a lot of the details on the side in the right place. Like, you know, you've got obviously the lines and this line is here, but this one I think is more in proportion. It's a bit thicker and this is better proportioned, but she doesn't have these details. So these ones, you can see they're 3D on this. They are also kind of 3D on the Mini, but on this one, they're just printed on the side. So that's meant that thing there corresponds to this. So that's a bit interesting. But again, I think this Nia looks kind of fine and doesn't look as, the proportions aren't as weird, although I admit they are also still a bit weird. I think to me, the most Nia looking Nia is the Mini's Nia, which is ridiculous because the Minis make no sense and they're such a weird scale. But I actually do think this Nia overall gets more of the details right than either of the larger and more expensive versions of her. So I think that is really interesting to think about in terms of the Thomas & Friends merchandise. So after those comparisons, I didn't realize this video was going to be so long for a video about a single engine. What are my thoughts on the TrackMaster Push-Along Nia? I think it's fine. I think, as I said, I think she adapts to the new width and the new wheel size better than Thomas does in terms of as her own toy. But I do think as a model of Nia, there's just something, and I think it's the cab, that's really throwing me off and making me go, this doesn't look quite right. Even though she's got the face, she's got the colors, she's got the details, something about her isn't right. And if you guys can work out what it is or think it's something that I have not said, please let me know. But yeah, that's kind of my thoughts on this Nia. And I think despite what people say, I think Nia and Rebecca are both totally fine characters in the show. I think they both have really cool designs. It's just a shame that the show itself is kind of a little bit garbage at the moment. But yeah, that's all I've kind of got to say about this one. In terms of value, this costs $5 from my local Woolworths, as do all of the small TrackMaster engines that they're now selling. So they cost $5 Australian dollars. And I think, again, what's interesting comparison is this costs $2 Australia. This is $5. And then this is about $12. So, you know, I think, I think it's kind of interesting to see that comparison in terms of pricing. Yeah. So in terms of value, I think for $5, you're definitely getting a lot of metal here. You're getting a lot more metal, a lot more weight than you get from this $5 Thomas model. So I think if that helps you decide, then be it as it may. So otherwise, that's all I've got time for. I'm gonna stop ranting now. Thanks for those cool things you do on YouTube. This is XtremeTrainz.